I was pretty much inspired to do this after watching Code Geass, which I've also done a review for that, and the OVA. But I do want to know before you guys watch this long documentary episode of the Code Geass Universe. Well, for one, I pretty much went into the historical aspects, this alternate timeline of Code Geass. The thing is, I will say most of it I gathered from the Wikipedia page, or the wiki page of the Code Geass Universe to follow the timeline. But some of it that I couldn't get any specific info on, I had to conclude for myself what happened. Most of those parts are just speculations about what went on. So most of it is just my theory. That doesn't mean it's accurate unless the creator says something, which I highly doubt they will be watching this episode. On the other hand, you may see a few technical issues with this because when I record specific clips, I record on my VLC player on my computer and it tends to mess up the video with these pop-ups here and there. So it's a hassle, and I just didn't feel like I wanted to go back and fix some of it. Or in general, not fix any of them. Because here's the thing. This project has been in development since 2017. When I was just into Code Geass, the hype for it. However, though, as time went on, it just was a slow drag to get this out. And at the time, well, I was transitioning over to a new program, or I was going to. I just wanted to finish all the projects on this older program so I could move to the new program and get rid of this other program. So I was trying to finish all these projects that were on this old program and didn't just delete the file. This was just a project I wanted to go ahead and just get it over with and be done and not bother to go through it too much because I was ready to move on. It was a long documentary. I covered pretty much what needed to be covered, even though some of it was a speculation. And there was, I was just ready to move on. I at least finished it for those that want to get into the Code Geass universe. I will note, prior to this episode being released, I had not seen the Resurrection movie at the time, nor did I see the whole retelling of the Code Geass films, which took an alternate route, which I do add a specific point in this documentary about that. But on the other hand, I just wanted to go ahead and finish this project, but I thought it was a good first episode to start Pop Culture Talk Season 2, and then I would move on to creating more Pop Culture Talk episodes, pre-record them, edit them, you name it. I also brought the actor from He Said, She Said, Stanley, my granddad. He loves history, and I wanted to get him on for this sort of viewpoint of alternate history. So I thought this would be kind of fun, so he does appear in this. Bear in mind, most of this stuff was filmed in 2017, and most of the recordings, 2018, like 2017, 2018, are around there, 2019, and recently some were recorded as of this video, or as of me telling you about this. And there was some stuff I just decided not to go deep into by that point because I was just ready to move on, which was the manga aspect. There's a lot of stuff that I wasn't able to talk about too much. I just want to go ahead and get this project done with and get it out there. So if you're a Code Geass fan, you're going to like this documentary. You could tell me you like it or you hate it. On top of that, I also mispronounce Akito, because I do mention Akito the Exiled in here because it's in the same universe. I kept mispronouncing the name, so you're going to see that, and I was too lazy to go back and fix it. So bear in mind, I mispronounced it. I did it also in the review as well. So just realize, I get it now, it's Akito, not Kayato. Anyways, I hope you enjoy this very first episode of Pop Culture Talk. And yeah, have fun.
Note: this is a fun documentary about an anime that is based in our world, but altered. There are real historical events and real people. I will be covering the main timeline of the anime's world, while comparing it to real events in our time. The calendar in this world might be the same, but is jumped a few centuries in. For example, in this show, it is 2017, when it really is 1962 or so. However, I won't be following this, as it does get confusing, so I'll just stick with the easier way of telling the time. It still follows the same timeline, just different calendar. And the technology advanced quicker in this world than ours. This anime, along with the music that you will hear in this documentary, all belong to Sunrise. All credit goes to them. Code Geass, a famous anime that came out in 2006. It had 2 seasons, and then OVA. But the world of Code Geass, when looking deep inside its timeline, is an interesting one. They may mention it, but you barely see much of it. And how everything turned out in the Code Geass world. Now, let's look deep into the past of the Code Geass world and see the differences between ours and the anime, and compare it to the real-life facts. Note, if you have not seen the series, or anything of Code Geass, be warned. There will be spoilers ahead. Now, let's get started on Code Geass.
The date was August 10 in the year 2010 of the imperial calendar. The Holy Britannian Empire had just declared war upon Japan. The Far East Island nation had held fast to its neutrality, and now Britannia looms as the world's only superpower. Rights to Japan's underground resources became a hotly disputed issue, straining the already deep-rooted diplomatic tensions between the two sides. In the deciding battle for the mainland, Britannian forces introduced into combat the humanoid autonomous armored knight known as the Nightmare Frame. The enemy's forces were far greater than anticipated, and the Nightmares obliterated the Japanese line of defense on the mainland with little effort. Japan became a dominion of the empire. The country was stripped of its freedom, its rights, and its name. Area 11. The defeated and once proud nation of Japan was rechristened with a mere number.
On this day, Japan was conquered by the Holy Britannian Empire. Soon, their land is called Area 11. And all rights of the Japanese people have been taken away, and they are now called 11s. Years later, 2017, an incident happens, and Lelouch, which is the 11th prince of the Holy Britannian Empire, along with his sister, they are in hiding after being exiled. Lelouch gets involved to see if anyone is hurt. This will get him into something big. A girl he meets will give him the power to control others, Geass. He will use this power to take down the Britannian Empire that controls half of the world, and change it for his little sister, Nunnally.
What's happening here?
I, Lelouch v. Britannia, command you. Now all of you, die!
Happily, Your Highness! Fire!
Or is he doing it for himself? However, to understand the world of Code Geass, and how Britannia became a superpower over the world, and the rest of the world for that matter, we need to look back to the past of how things turned out in the Code Geass history. 55 through 54 BC, Gallic Wars period. The Roman Empire is expanding through Europe. Britain is one of those countries that they will try to invade. Britain still remains independent, though Julius Caesar will try to invade. Soon he would launch a full-scale invasion of Britannia. And so Julius Caesar launches his invasion. He invades Britain twice. The first attempt fails. Within the next year, he tries again. But his second attempt also fails. And so, Britain was saved from the Roman rule. By that point, Caesar went back to the Gallic. Many years later, 27 BC, Augustus reigned. During this period, Augustus was in control. The Roman Empire would once again try to conquer Britain, and they were successful, now under the control of the Roman Republic. With the British Isles occupied, it will take several years until someone will rebel against the Roman occupiers. Year 1 AD. At this time, a man by the name of Alwyn, who was a Celtic king, would soon lead Britain to victory. Alwyn would meet with strong resistance from the local tribes to come together and repulse the Roman Empire. With his forces and him leading, they managed to stop the Romans, or push them out of the country, and thus winning their independence with the help of Alwyn. This will soon mark the beginning of the establishing year of the imperial calendar used by the Holy Britannian Empire. With his success, the Celts wanted him to be their so-called super king, and so he became the first member of the Britannian imperial family. His rule and his descendants would keep their land safe from foreign threat. However, with Alwyn as the first king of Britannia, there's not a lot to go on. Or if in this universe, if the Vikings or Normans even came to Britain. Some words that sound German for some of the characters does sound like it could have possibly happened in this universe, which could mean maybe the Vikings and Normans did come to Britain. And maybe they joined the Britannian land. Who's to say? All that I can gather is that Alwyn's descendants would stop another invasion of Britannia. In the year 43 AD, Claudius is now the Emperor of Rome. Who's to say that he tried to invade Britain or Britannia, but would fail just like the others, by the descendants of Alwyn. But by this point there's not a lot of clear evidence in the Code Geass universe that goes into detail on other things that could have happened, or even if Claudius tried to invade Britain, who knows? But all we know is that this is the start of the Britannian Empire that would be a world superpower in the future.
One of the most magnificent conquests of the Roman government was its victories in many places of Europe, throughout Europe. The question comes up often, what would have happened if Rome had not invaded Britain twice? Of course, they actually did invade Britain a number of times, but after the first invasion, Julius Caesar crossed into Britain with only 2 legions of soldiers, and of course that would be about 12,000 Roman soldiers. He was defeated, he could not hold his position, and retreated back to Europe. About another year later, which would be classified as a second invasion, he entered Britain with 5 legions of soldiers, and that would be about 30,000 soldiers. He held the country, and later on, years following, additional invasions took place, and he ended up actually conquering all of Britain and building a barrier to the north called the Roman Wall in North Britain. Suppose Rome had never been successful with their invasion of Britain. The question comes up then, what would Britain have been like? What Rome brought to Britain was a lot of architecture, the building of roads, building of bridges, brought in many waterway systems, built schools. All of those things would have never happened had the Roman attempt been given up after the first invasion. The country was not unified. There were a lot of fighting factions throughout the country. But with the Roman conquest of Britain, it was the first time the country had ever been united as one government. The Roman military set up a government in Britain, and they were there for about 450 years before they finally gave up to their assailants coming in from many different quarters. It was no longer considered feasible to hold on to Brick.
From this point on, there was no other recording of what happened through the centuries, though in my speculation, the Crusades would have happened, with religion also being involved. But what's also interesting is its religion in this timeline. Jesus Christ is never really mentioned, or Christianity. So in this universe, it could be that it wasn't established. But there are hints that it is, but not widely spread out across the world like in our world. The discovery of Securidite in the Code Geass universe would change the world. At the time it was discovered, they called it the Philosopher's Stone. The first place that Securidite would be found was Stonehenge, sometime during the Middle Ages. But not much other information goes into the Middle Ages, and what people back then used Securidite for. A man by the name of Marco Polo traveled all the way to Asia and soon came to China. He discovered many things that the Asians had been doing, which this would soon lead to a trade between Europe and Asia. But he didn't stop there. He then traveled to Japan, and by being there, he discovered a large deposit of mineral. With this amount of Securidite, it would later spread through the world, along with other trades. In this universe, the Securidite would become a valuable energy source. In the anime, its power would be used for nightmare frames, and would also be used for solar panels in most of the cities in the Code Geass universe. It can even power cars, but is also a dangerous threat. In one episode, an explosion occurs, destroying a ship filled with it, causing mass destruction. When the 100-Year War erupts, the Joan of Arc story happens, as it's mentioned in Kaito the Exiled. Either at this time in the 14th or 15th century, CC, one of the main characters in the show, is born, but the date of her birth is unknown, or her parents. During the 14th or 15th century, CC is shown as a child, but lonely, only wanting to be loved. A nun gives her the power to make people love her, Geass. However, the older CC got, her power got to the point where people would just love her by looking at her eyes.
The Geass I manifested was to make people love me.
Love you?
Because deep in my heart, I wanted to be loved by someone. And my wish was granted. Because of my Geass, I was loved by everyone. But in the end, it was too much. Love without limit was love without meaning. I forgot what love really was. The only person I believed in was her. Because my Geass couldn't work on her, she was the one person who would scold me for being trivial. And yet...
She was unable to control her power at that point. The nun that gave her the power was an immortal, and she wanted to exchange immortality towards CC.
Can you imagine the agony? The hell of living on and on for eternity?
What are you talking about?
I'm sorry, dear. I'm afraid I tricked you.
And by that point, CC became immortal, and the nun died. CC would now be immortal for the rest of her life, living through history in the Code Geass world, from being prosecuted as a witch, burned at a stake, execution after execution, death after death, and many other things through time. She will suffer. For Britannia, their family goes back from the start of Alwyn, but even after his rule, more would follow to build the family through the generations. In the Code Geass universe, the family is a big one, and Lelouch is part of that family, along with his sister, which are in hiding in the series. But, to trace their family, And to learn more about this family, we need to go back to the 17th century. Elizabeth I is in power of England. Her reign will last from November 17th, 1558 through March 24th, 1603. While Queen of England, Britannia went through the changes, the so-called Golden Age, dealing with trade and with Spain, and many other political things. France and England were at war against each other, but Elizabeth suspended this during her reign. Though the big rival was Spain, as England clashed both in Europe and in the Americas, in skirmishes that exploded into the Anglo-Spanish War of 1585 through 1604.
We're ready to fire on your command, Capitan.
During her reign, she was not married and didn't have a son. But during the period of her rule, she did have a child, Henry IX. But there is no evidence of who the husband could be, but these could be the potential fathers. When Elizabeth died in 1603, or if you want to follow the Britannian calendar, 1658 ATB, Henry IX ascended the throne.
So to specify the Queen Elizabeth I lifespan, she was born in 1533 and died in 1603. That would have made her 70 years old. Don't know that she was the oldest monarch to ever rule in England, but certainly she had a very successful reign. The unfortunate part about that was that she produced no heir. And apparently, at the time of her death, she had no rightful heir. She died in 1603. You have to look back at the possible monarchy that would have developed with Mary, Queen of Scots. And actually, this monarchy did develop. She had a son who became James I of England. He was also King of Scotland and became King of England, and was the first monarch to unite England under one throne. He united Ireland, Scotland, and England. He was born in 1556. So what occurred when Elizabeth I was a child was her first cousin, Mary, Queen of Scots, had a son, and he was 24 years old, or excuse me, Mary, Queen of Scots was 24 when James I was born. However, if Queen Elizabeth had had an heir, more than likely that heir would have inherited the throne from her, and James I would never become King of England. As a result, James I becoming King of England, there were several significant things that did happen. Number one, he continued the attempt to settle the Americas, especially Jamestown was founded in 1607. The Lost Colony, Roanoke Island, that establishment was founded in 1587, and it's supposed to have existed for 2 years. When Governor White returned to England in 1587, he was held back from returning because of the war that England and Spain were conducting. When he did return in 1589, the colony was no longer there. The problem with that was that there was no attempt by Queen Elizabeth to do any more colonization of America. So when Queen Elizabeth died, she had no heirs, and what was potentially happening was James I, at that point, was old enough to become the King of England, which he did in 1603. As a result of James I becoming King of England, he continued the attempt to settle North America at Jamestown. And he, in addition to that, helped to establish the Jamestown settlement, and it became a thriving settlement after a number of difficult years. This probably would not have happened if Queen Elizabeth had lived, if she had had an heir, because she had already given up on the colonies, or on establishing the colony. In addition to the settlement in Jamestown in 1607, he also presided over the writing, the first complete revised writing of the English Bible that we know today, the King James Version. That took place in 1611, and he, of course, was a Protestant, just as Queen Elizabeth had been. But he seemed to have taken a more forceful effort in establishing and authorizing a new English version of Bible. So there you have the difference. James, King James I, furthered the ambition of England and America. Elizabeth, Queen Elizabeth I, had given up on that, and those are the two major things that would have changed. Had Elizabeth had an heir, he would likely have discontinued, or she would have discontinued the interest in America. So I think you can assume that if Elizabeth had really produced an heir to the throne, that heir would have more than likely taken over the monarchy of England, and James I would have been left out. So there have been a lot of changes that would have taken place had an heir been produced by Elizabeth. You know, we wouldn't know the Jamestown settlement, we wouldn't have the English Bible, and all sorts of other things that England continued to do after that, which Elizabeth seemed to have no interest in at all. And Elizabeth died in 1603. She was 70 years old. She had plenty of opportunity to have married and produced a child, and maybe there was an attempt to do that. We just don't really have facts to verify that. So England was left without an heir to the throne through Elizabeth. And the heir to the throne took place between Queen Elizabeth's first cousin, Mary Queen of Scots.
This period of his reign was the golden age for the Tudor dynasty, and he gained great wealth and fortune from the New World. With this, Britannia would continue this and soon will grow their empire through the New World, which was America. Though, as for Britannia or Britain in this world, it is very unclear if they were conquering most lands in the world. In our world, they did this, discovering Australia in the 1700s. But in this universe, it is very unlikely. If they did this in this universe, then it would still follow the historical facts. However, we don't know much, as this information does not clarify whether or not Britain was spreading out like how they did in ours. The discovery of the New World, America, by Christopher Columbus, will bring a lot of Europeans over to conquer lands and to gain riches. From Spain, France, and Britain, they will all want to take the Americas. But America will soon have a future, but not like ours. In this world, it will be different.
All men are not created equal. Some are born swifter of foot, some with greater beauty. Some are born into poverty, and others born sick and feeble, both in birth and in upbringing. In sheer scope of ability, every human is inherently different. Yes, that is why people discriminate against one another, which is why there is struggle, competition, and the unfaltering march of progress. Inequality is not wrong. Equality is. What of the EU, which made equality a right? Rabbled politics by a popularity contest. The Chinese Federation with its equal distribution of wealth? A nation of lazy dullards. But not our beloved Britannia. We fight, we compete. Evolution is continuous.
Evolution. Such a pretty little word.
Britannia alone moves forward, advancing steadily into the future. Even the death of my son Clovis demonstrates Britannia's unswerving commitment to progress. We will fight on! We shall struggle, compete, plunder, and dominate! And in the end, the future shall be ours! All hail Britannia! All hail Britannia! All hail Britannia! All hail Britannia!
In episode 22, Euphemia wants to make a special administrative zone for Japan, though Zero, Lelouch, wants to start a rebellion, fearing that his Black Knights will vanish if his sister did this. There would be no fighting. But his sister convinces him, and he halts his plan. But he jokes about massacring the Japanese, and at that point, his Geass power is now out of control, making his sister get brainwashed, and starts a full bloody massacre to the Japanese people. Chaos is everywhere. Thus, Lelouch blames himself for this.
Show me your savior, because I'm not the Messiah of Japan.
Arturelia, you're our only hope.
Stop it. Don't force me. Must I atone for this sin? Is this a cross I have to bear too?
So, he puts her down. But despite all of this, he uses this to his advantage, to get the people stirred up to revolt against Britannia.
As the symbol of Britannia's hypocrisy!
His sister later dies in front of Suzaku, and Zero will unite Japan.
The new Japan we go on to build shall be one broad enough to accept all peoples, histories, and ideologies, where the strong shall not reign over the weak, and it shall be called the United States of Japan!
He's done it. This is the birth of a nation.
But there was an attempt to unite a continent against Britannia 2 centuries prior. The colonies revolt against Great Britannia. Leading is none other than General George Washington. With the war escalating, we need to go back to see what triggered this event. During the 1760s and 70s, the same sort of thing happened in our world. The colonists did not like the taxation. The Boston Massacre did not help things, and by 1775 the rebel army soon declared war against Britannia, and in 1776 declared Declaration of Independence. Henry X is frustrated with this revolt against him, his subjects in the colonies. The war would soon escalate for a couple of years, from 1775 to 1781. With the American Revolution from Britannia, the rebel army needed assistance, and the only one to look to was France. At this time, Louis XVI is in power. Continental Congress wanted Benjamin Franklin to discuss terms and get assistance for their move for independence. And so he traveled across to Europe. Now, this event that occurred, it does not have a particular year of when it happened. But Benjamin Franklin was going to appeal to King Louis XVI for assistance and help in their cause. But he was captured. The Duke of Britannia bribed him. He persuaded him with the title of nobility and territories in the colonies. It is unclear whether or not how Franklin felt about this. Was he threatened? Or did he want more than what his allies would give him? It's unclear. All we know is that he defected to Britannia. This will soon be a big blow to the Continental Army. Yorktown, 1781. The siege at Yorktown begins. However, without French support, Washington has to strategize on his own, but it will lead to a bloody battle. With him leading the charge and bombarding the British, there will be a big end to all of it. Washington is killed in the battle, thus marking a severe blow to the American movement for independence.
If George Washington had been killed at Yorktown, the British would have never surrendered to the revolutionary forces. Consequently, the colonies would still be the colonies. We would not be the United States of America. We would not have any such thing as we know today, Constitution of the United States, which, by the way, is one of the most democratic agreements between government and the people that's ever been written. There would be no presidency. There would be no freedom, no Bill of Rights. There would be no Constitution. George Washington would have probably been, if he hadn't been killed at the Battle of Yorktown but had just been captured, he would have been considered a traitor, and he would have been hung for high treason. Then on the other hand, if Benjamin Franklin had become the traitor, and Britain had won the war, George Washington had been killed, Benjamin Franklin probably would have been promoted in Parliament because he contributed to the successful victory of the British over the colonies.
And so, the Britannian forces destroy the Continental Army. A decisive defeat for the Continental Army will soon lead to Britannia going to Continental Congress and rounding up all the members, including generals. With all the traitors rounded up, they are tried for treason and are either executed by firing squad or hanging, thus marking the end of the American Revolution in the New World. Benjamin Franklin would have been given title of Earl by the Britannians, though he would be a traitor to his allies. If he hadn't done this, Britannia in the future would not have existed. In an extra DVD, CC knew Benjamin Franklin and George Washington personally, but there's not a lot of information about her with Washington and Franklin. Henry X of Britannia is thrilled by the victory. Soon, the Britannian army manages to contain order in the colonies, and Henry X still holds monarchy. However, Britannia's future would soon be close to doom, as an enemy, not too far from them, would come from the shadows and bring Britannia down on its knees.
Revolutionary calendar, year 228, February 18th. The EU Army's 132nd Regiment attempted to retake St. Petersburg. But their route was blocked by the Britannian army, which had caught wind of the plan. They were surrounded in Narva, a city southwest of St. Petersburg.
In the Code Geass OVA, Layla McCall is writing in her journal, and the date is year 228, Florial 18th, ATB May 7th, 2017. This calendar system is set in Europe, even though for Britannia, we follow their calendar. But why is their calendar that way in Europe? Well, it all started on the day of July 14th, 1789. The revolutionary calendar starts with the storming of the Bastille. 1789. It's been a few years after Britannia quelled the Washington Rebellion. However, in France, people are getting angry at their king, Louis. As taxes go up and people start rioting. Now, since in this universe, Louis never helped in the revolution in America, and spending millions for the war effort. But whatever he did, either taxes or what, something still would have led the people, and, along with them, Maximilien Robespierre, to get rid of the King and Queen of France. July 14th, 1789, the storming of the Bastille begins. And this is where the start of the future for Europe in the Code Geass Universe begins. At this moment, the calendar would soon be set to year 1 for France in 1790, and soon all of Europe in the future. Leading the French Revolution is Maximilien Robespierre. With his influence, people will overthrow their king and the monarchy. After that, the people soon go to Versailles, women bursting into the palace, and soon they make the king and queen go to Paris. Though this revolution, there will be a figure that will appear, a hero of the revolution. He will make his opening very soon. Within the years, the revolution will take a dark turn. The guillotine will make its first appearance. With revolution spreading across the continent, the home of Marie Antoinette still threatens France. The king will soon be executed along with the queen, months later. But the execution does not stop there. During the period, France will round up every noble and kill them, raining more blood. And with war in the east, France will soon tear itself apart, with Britannia and possibly Prussia and Austria fighting France. The execution of nobles and many other people would continue. People would be suspected as traitors of the revolution. And Maximilian does not stop this. Even his own allies that want to stop it are executed. Execution and violent massacres happen everywhere in France. This will be known as the Terror. It has two phases, the Terror and the Great Terror. And many would lose their lives for this revolution that had gone too far. But all this later comes back to bite Maximilian. He would soon make the biggest mistake of not turning in papers of traitors to the other politicians. This will make them fear that they are on the list. So one day they take the power away from him, and he is soon on house arrest. But he tries to commit suicide along with his fellow allies, but he remains alive, only shattering his jaw. He will be the last person to die at the guillotine. He started a revolution, but also would cause another future for Britannia to face. The guillotine soon finishes him off for good. The French Revolution in this world would basically be known all over Europe as the Age of Revolution. with numerous national revolutions taking place, except in the British Isles, under the rule of King Henry X, who continues to hold absolute monarchy. But with what happened in Europe, would soon lead to a formation, or the so-called early stages, of Europa United. However, Europe would probably not be at that state yet, as now that they overthrown their old monarchy, they are now rebuilding a new government, democracy.
Our ancestors were exploited by royals and nobility.
And then they freed themselves by means of the revolution. Much blood was spilled, but those who spilled it were unsatisfied and called for more. They finally avenged a millennium of injustices by killing royals, nobles, all who abused power.
Britannia may be safe from Europe's Age of Revolution, but there will be a figure that will rise, and Britannia will be in big trouble, as this one person will unite a whole continent and charge Britannia. In the OVA, Code Geass, Kaito the Exiled, was a different approach in this series, since the original was only set in Japan. This story is only set in Europe. In the anime, the EU is spread out through Europe, through the Middle East and Africa. The EU is at war with Britannia and Euro-Britannia. Paris is the main capital of the EU, with different presidents, 3 presidents holding power, and a different political system.
You know, there's something about a woman at a party reading Guibert's tactical writings that says, keep your distance.
But how did France and the rest of Europe combine their nations into the EU? We need to look back at the very end of the French Revolution.
They may be distant descendants of the royals and nobles who were driven from this continent into the New World, but they still feel entitled to all of this. And that's why I can't help but think, if only General Napoleon Bonaparte, hero of the Revolution, had become Emperor of Europe, rather than dying at the guillotine like he did.
He tried to make himself a dictator.
The dictatorship of one talented man is far more beneficial than the democracy of the ignorant masses.
After Robespierre was executed, France was still at war with Britain, or Britannia. Napoleon got his fame through this, as the hero of the revolution, though naval battles were still constant in the late 1790s. By the late 18th century and the early 19th century, the Age of Revolution was sparked over the continent. However, if that is so, much of the countries would still have their military and would have established new governments. Napoleon Bonaparte had grown through military strength during and after the French Revolution. He did a military expedition in Egypt in 1798 and a coup in November 1799. But through the years, he will grow to power. And the first start of the Napoleonic Wars would begin in 1803. And by that point, France and Britannia were already at a war during the Revolution, though Britannia would declare war on France. He became the Emperor of France in 1804. Europe, who may have had their Age of Revolution, but other countries may not have wanted to be part of this idea with France and to unite the continent. Who's to say? But with Napoleon as Emperor of France and his rule, he would want to conquer all of Europe and will lead his army into victory in one battle after battle. with his victories across Europe. He wins the Battle of Ulm. The Austrian army was defeated. And now he turns to Britain. He was determined to invade the country, since Britannia declared war, and that peace would no longer be sufficient. On October 21st, 1805, Napoleon Bonaparte sends his fleet to Britannia. The French and Spanish forces will face off against the Britannian Navy. The Battle of Trafalgar begins. With the help of the Spanish, Britannia's fleet is destroyed, and Admiral Horatio Nelson is killed in the battle.
What would have happened if Napoleon had conquered Britain? Some people have thought that the Battle of Trafalgar took place before that, before his attempt to invade Britain, but actually history tells us that that battle was delayed until after Napoleon had given up the attempt to invade England. Military conflict was a tremendous thing between France and Britain for a number of centuries, the 14th, 15th, 16th, 17th, and 18th century. France and Britain had fought many wars together, and quite often the victory changed sides back and forth. First one would win, and then the other would win. So it seemed like nobody was really able to hold on to a position of victory very long. However, if Napoleon had won in the invasion of Britain and had been successful in holding on to that position, it would have changed the political and military landscape in England and Europe for centuries to come. Napoleon began planning his invasion in 1803 and 1804. It was known as Operation Sea Lion. However, the invasion was called off in 1805 due to several problems. Napoleon had assigned Gustave to putting together the invasionary apparatus to cross the English Channel. But what happened was Gustave had become tremendously sick, went back to Paris in 1805, and subsequently died of tuberculosis. So that operation was discontinued. What Gustave had done was he built a number of barges to be used in ferrying troops and weapons across the channel. But when they were later tested, they proved to be a failure. Many men perished in the attempt because of faulty design of the barges, and a lot of military men and equipment was lost in the channel. A lot of soldiers died, and as a result of Napoleon's compassion for his army, which was always the case, he personally took part in the rescue effort to save his soldiers. Napoleon had often said to his generals that if he could only control the English Channel for 6 hours, he would control the world. So the question comes up then, suppose Napoleon had been successful, what would have changed in England and what would have changed in Europe and consequently in the world? Much would have been different for Europe. First, the French culture and dress would likely have been exported to England. Simply put, dress styles and eating culture and all the architectural designs would have gone from France to England, and it would have changed significantly the nature of what England looks like today. Second, religion would have been definitely changed because in England the Protestant belief was dominant. In France, it was the Catholic faith that dominated. In the 16th century, Henry VIII had thrown out Catholicism and adopted the Church of England and had claimed himself as the dominant power over the church. In other words, he rejected the Pope and the papacy. In the 19th century, France was 83% Catholic. No doubt this would have definitely changed England. Third, politics and trade were also looked at in a very different way. France took the position of protecting its country from free trade. England, on the other hand, tended toward globalization. That is, they reached out with the idea that free trade was a good thing. Had Napoleon been successful in invading England, there would have been no Waterloo for Napoleon in 1815. Occupying England during the 19th century would have also more than likely prevented the Victorian era in England. The Victorian era was a period of great prosperity for England. The Victorian era was marked with major achievements. England had expanded its conquest to Africa, to India, to the Middle East, and other parts of Asia. During this time, England shared its literary and industrial accomplishments with their conquered territories.
With Britannia's fleet destroyed, it opens a gateway to Britannia, and the EU army soon invades England. Soon, the British army is defeated, and Queen Elizabeth III flees London. The EU army occupies London, and Napoleon moves inward. With his success, he continues to conquer the British Isles, making it part of the EU. But he does meet with heavy resistance. By that time, as Napoleon's army is heading toward the British Isles, the Queen soon has to retreat to Edinburgh, Scotland. In 1807, as she is in Edinburgh, a revolutionary militia arrests her and forces her to abdicate, ending the monarchy. This will be known as the humiliation of Edinburgh. Though at some point he occupied the British Isles and would be a part of the French Empire, or has a new government established after he conquered it. Napoleon's victory through Europe changed the continent. However, in a sense, he would have also created another empire that will rise, along with another group called Euro-Britannia in East Europe. With the nobles which fled to America, there were those that fled to the east of Europe. During the French Revolution, along with countries that had their age of revolution in the continent. In the future that Napoleon had carved for Europe, they will face big problems from Britannia and Euro-Britannia. Euro-Britannia would be established sometime after the unspecified World Wars in the mid-20th century. The Holy Britannian Empire would later conquer Russia after the wars, in the first sphere of expansion. And by the 21st century, the EU, with its expanded power, faces the Holy Britannian Empire and Euro-Britannia. Euro-Britannia would have Julius Kingsley cause chaos by fake news of terror, which is almost similar to our real-world problems of today.
Very soon, Paris will be met with destruction.
With his method, he almost breaks Europe apart.
There was a bioterror attack in London! Fall over now! Just let it burn!
An explosion on the metro? This is genocide!
The fat cats are fleeing to the new world!
They think they're better than us? Let's hang out!
I just can't believe it. This is happening in Geneva and Berlin too. So it's all over Europia now? The cities are overrun with people rioting. Scary stuff.
They're saying the North Sea bombing is what started the whole thing.
Seeing it on social media doesn't make it true.
Yeah, but a whole lot of people have posted that.
Listen, people just get excited about scandals and tragedy. Doesn't matter if it's the truth. That's just human nature.
Nothing spreads faster than a nasty rumor.
You're telling me somebody's spreading false reports on purpose? Who would do that?
By the time Queen Elizabeth III is held by the militia group, she is forced to abdicate. Though even after all this, not much is recorded in detail. However, Sir Ricardo von Britannia, Duke of Britannia, and his friend and subordinate, Sir Richard Hector, Knight of One, manages to save Elizabeth and her followers. They bring her along with her followers to the New World, America, where a couple of years ago was at war with the rebels, but was soon put down. The Queen and her followers, now exiled from their country, Britain, they will establish a new country in the Americas. Their new establishment will be in the eastern part of America, and thus, this is where Britannia is born. And through the few years, they started to build their empire. In 1813, Queen Elizabeth is at her deathbed, and she nominates Ricardo von Britannia to be her successor, Ascension Throne Britannia, and the calendar was established at this time. Queen Elizabeth died childless, and soon Ricardo would now rule. As Britannia is building its new home, Napoleon, on the other hand, has had success after success in Europe. However, his reign will soon lead to his death. Napoleon then looks to Russia and would soon launch an invasion of Russia and to subjugate the country. If he is successful, he will conquer Russia and unite it with all of Europe. 1815. Napoleon's army will soon fight the Russians at Waterloo. This will be known as the Battle of Waterloo. However, Napoleon was defeated and wasn't successful in conquering Russia. With his loss, he has to retreat back to France. At some certain time, the EU was a massive superpower. Napoleon would soon want to become Emperor of Europe. But really, he would become a dictator to all of Europe with his rule. And the revolutionaries did not like this. The revolutionaries stopped Napoleon Bonaparte before he forms the Revolutionary Empire and becomes emperor. They saw him only as a big threat, and his ideas. His idea for emperor and forming an empire, it would have become what the revolutionaries had been fighting against. So Napoleon, the hero of the revolution, would be executed by the guillotine. They murdered their own hero of the revolution, but stopped him before he did something that they were against. However, Napoleon's victory over Europe led to the foundation of Europa United, aka for short, the EU. Back in the Americas, Britannia would have been building its empire from the ground up all over again, but also angered that they've been exiled from their home. They also looked to the rest of America's continent, along with other areas. To build their power, they would conquer all of the continent and the rest of the Americas. This would be their manifest destiny. And thus, they start their conquest, moving up into Canada. Then they move to the west of America, then down into Mexico, and by then Mexico had revolted against Spain. But with Spain now under the control of the EU, Mexico declared their independence, but not for long, as Britannia would now advance through their borders, and managing to crush their army. Soon they will go down into Central America and South America, and as time goes on, they have all control of the continent. From Canada, America, Mexico, Central America, and South America. They will soon be united as one, and only be called Britannia. In the future, most Britannians, including the aristocrats, view Washington as their founding father of Britannia. Their power grew, and now they have a large portion of the world. And by the future, it would be an empire that would go to war against the EU, and will later conquer Japan, Philippines, and other parts of Asia.
Code Geass, Reina of Darkness, which is a prequel to the main show. This is set during the Edo period of Japan. The story follows a young man named Reina, whose life as a one-armed ninja in training is changed when his hidden village home is attacked. Meeting a certain green-haired witch, which is CC, he accepts an offer of power to save his friends, but somehow gets a cursed metal arm instead. Also in play are mysterious creatures called nightmares, a hidden princess, and a Britannian officer with a bizarre similarity to a future 11th prince. Most of the story follows them and CC traveling with them. In this timeline, there is a somewhat civil war going on in Britannia, which would be sort of similar to ours, but a little different. Britannia is in the middle of one mixed with a civil war for most of the story, following the death of the current emperor and his eldest child. Claire is the rightful heir, and the only one actually capable of being a leader, but some nobles have their own plans in place. The assorted corrupt nobles, treacherous knights, and nightmares serve as such throughout the main character's journey. The ultimate conflict is being driven by two Britannian noblemen, Dash and Lorenzo, while Dash seeks Rena's pendants for mysterious means. Sorisi wishes to possess it to have a hold over Dash, and both come into conflict with the heroes from the start of the story until the final chapters. Claire, who is the princess of Britannia who went to Japan, is successfully made empress and ends the civil war, with Reina and company becoming knights in her service, finally able to make a home for themselves. What I found fascinating in the manga, from what I've read, was that the Spaniards show up, possibly the Philippines, which in reality Spain did have the Philippines until the end of the Spanish-American War. This still holds some interesting historical aspects of that, at least the world history of the Code Geass universe.
The one who activated it is...
What is this? The past? C2? No. But...
Hold it right there!
The war erupts like a volcano. It is unclear how the unspecified World War or World Wars started in the Code Geass universe. All we know is that the EU tried to invade Russia to unite it with the rest of the EU, like Napoleon did a century prior. Britannia would have possibly joined in the war, alongside the Russians, especially giving them new tanks and airplanes. And the reason for this is due to the descendants of the nobles who fled to Eastern Europe, would be Britannian loyals, which would be the reason for this. So with Britannia's supplies aiding the Russians, along with the troops, this would help prevent an invasion into Britannia itself. CC was a nurse during this time, possibly a Britannian medic in the field? Who knows? Though with Britannia involved, the EU would have struggled. As the war dragged on, it must have become stalemate. The EU couldn't break through the lines. But neither could the Russians, along with Britannia. This world war could have played out like our own, with a big stalemate, but would have possibly gone on longer. As the EU attempts to try and invade would fail, millions of people would die. Both the EU, Britannia, and Russia would suffer the losses of many. Though the start of the war would also gain the upper hand for Britannia. With aiding and sending troops, this would start a very small establishment along with the help of the descendants. At some point, the war would halt. Both sides had suffered the losses of many. But it would start again, as the EU would try to launch another campaign into Russia. The race would be on. Hitler, or the Nazis, would never be involved in this world. Hitler was never mentioned. My theory is, he probably never existed in the Code Geass world. If he did, he would have died in the war. Thus, the Nazi Party would never have been made. The same would go with Stalin, the founders of the Communist Party in Russia. Not much is clear of what happened in the 1940s or 30s. If there was a Great Depression, I doubt it would have happened in this universe. But here's what I can guess. Japan's empire wanted to expand all over Asia by the 1930s, just like our own world. They were already taking over areas in the Pacific. China was also fighting them, due to their homeland being invaded. China's country was already another empire of the three dominant superpowers in the world. But I suppose that Japan's empire wanted to conquer China. Britannia would get involved in conquering Asia for their empire. And so, with the Japanese already having most control of the Pacific, Britannia would launch their invasion and conquer the Pacific and build their empire throughout the world. This would be the First Pacific War. Back in Europe, the Second War on the Eastern Front would begin. Russia is prepared, and so the war would erupt a second time in Eastern Europe. The EU once again will try to take Russia, and by doing so would prevent Britannia from ever attacking them from the east of the world. But they could also launch their attack from there. At this point, the descendants would help the Russians fight off against the invaders. But there could have also been fighting in Africa against Britannian forces, as the EU had control over areas in Africa during Napoleon's invasion. As for the Middle East, I'm not sure, due to the fact that there's not a lot of information about the Middle Eastern Federation in the Code Geass world. If there was war there, it could have been established then. There's not a lot of information to go on with the Middle Eastern Federation, or when it was established. It would have been likely that Africa would have been a battleground for both Britannia and the EU, who's to say. As the war started again in Eastern Europe, with Russia and Britannians fighting the EU, Britannia at the time would have also been expanding across part of Africa, along with Asia, facing the Japanese Empire. Back in the Pacific, the Japanese army faces Britannia. However, the Japanese are taking heavy losses in the Pacific. At some point during the war, Britannia was managing to take land by land in the Pacific, even taking Japanese homeland islands. Japan would be desperate to stop the Britannian advance, and thus they would use the tactic, like in our own world, kamikaze. Kamikazes decimate some of Britannia's naval fleets and got them to slow down their progress. They couldn't stop the advancing Britannian armies in the Pacific. New bases were established during the course of the war, and they would stop the kamikaze attacks like in our own world. Meanwhile, back in Europe, the battle for Poland began. The EU army tries to take the capital of Poland, Warsaw, from the Russian forces. In the streets, it's a hectic battle, from house to house, to street to street. While in the front lines, in the fields, it's more intense and bloody. By day's end, both sides had heavy losses, though the Russians took more casualties. At some point, the EU ends up taking the capital and forces the Russians back. Meaningless bloodshed would have been spilled, just to stop the threat of a future invasion from both Britannia and the EU. With the help of the Russians, they would have possibly suffered the most. Though some kind of bond would soon be formed between Russia and the rest of Europe, which could have ended the war there, making peace. While the war may have ended, the EU decided to give up on even trying to invade the rest of the country. The heavy casualties was too much. Both sides would soon make peace. But this would be a big problem for the EU in the future, as in Akito the Exiled. The fact is, Britannia, which are members of Britannia, have their own group in Europe and are wanting to fight the EU due to seeing they're no better than the very people they sought to remove from power during their revolution. With Poland captured, it would have been under the control of the EU. Back in the Pacific, in 1944 Japan will lose, quoted as, lost a major war. With losses on all fronts from both China and with the invasion of Britannia, Japan had no hope in winning both fronts. Britannia was getting closer and closer to their homeland, and so Japan decided to surrender. With this, Britannia agreed to the surrender. However, the lands that were taken will belong to Britannia, and those that still had Japanese troops would be forced to leave and give it to Britannia. Japan's army was shattered, but the war came to a close. At some point after the war, Japan became a democracy as a result of this. This could have been somewhat of World War II in the Code Geass world, but it may have been one big world war stretched out in a long period. But most of this, all of it, would just be speculation on how things would have played out in the Code Geass world. And it's unclear if Britannia, like in our world, would have used a nuclear bomb against Japan. If it happened, then that could have been the same outcome in our world, ending the war. But then again, we don't have enough information. Finally, the so-called World Wars would end. However, in the 21st century, the EU will face Britannia and Euro-Britannia from all fronts, with new generations to fight in the war. While Japan will be invaded by Britannia, and all their rights will be taken away. Thus goes to show that even after the bloodiest wars, there will be no end to war, as long as there is an empire that wants to conquer and expand. After the end of the World Wars, Britannia soon ended up invading and conquering Russia. This was a big mistake for the EU's part. With this, the establishment of Euro-Britannia is born. Euro-Britannia would face off against the EU, as seen in Akito the Exiled. Most of Eastern Europe will be under the control of Euro-Britannia. While in the Pacific, it is unclear if certain areas were under Britannia's wing. But I can speculate that most of the islands that were taken, like in our world, would have been under Britannia's control. All of this could have happened in the 1950s or late 40s. However, Britannia will suffer with a problem back home, of taking the throne to gain power. But blood must be spilled. (1955). In the times after the wars, Britannia would go through a big problem. The title of this period was Emblem of Blood. In this year, assassinations and betrayals were frequent among the imperial family that coveted the throne. This year was also when 6th Prince Victor Z. Britannia and 7th Prince Charles Z. Britannia were born. But their mother was assassinated, though it is unknown why. My speculation is due to this Emblem of Blood period. Killings after killings to gain the throne and to achieve power. This would have been a hectic time for Britannia. Possibly the people wanted a new king or prince. They wanted a new leader after the World Wars, which probably brought a lot of problems for the economy. If the war had brought on a lot of money for Britannia, that would have been the golden time. They would have wanted a new leader for their country, but either both sides didn't agree on anything. The royal family would have fought against each other. This would have brought the country down on its knees for a time. As for the rest of the world, not much else is mentioned of the rest of the 1950s throughout the world. But all I can guess is that, through the betrayals and assassinations, the country went through different changes, and the people had to experience the change.
Here is the last remaining timeline of the Code Geass universe, following up to the main events of the story. 1998. The 97th Emperor of Britannia is overthrown. Reasons unknown. And Charles Z. Britannia ascends to the Britannian throne.
Charles also marries Marianne v. Britannia with VV. They plan to build a weapon to destroy the gods. In 2003, Shin kills the entire family. Akito is the only family member who survives. 2009, Marianne v. Britannia is killed by VV. Her children, Lelouch v. Britannia and Nunnally v. Britannia, are sent to Japan as political hostages. Soon, Lelouch and his little sister are in Japan and meet Suzaku. The Second Pacific War erupts. When Lelouch meets with Suzaku, they become friends, but outside Japan, Britannia is conquering Indochinese Peninsula. This would be named Area 10 by Britannia. War was once again beginning in the Pacific, and soon Europe. Japan at this time was neutral, but since Britannia was taking over parts of the Pacific, Japan aligned its policy with Chinese Federation and EU's politics, and apply economic pressure upon Britannia. At some point, an event happened called the Oriental Incident. The Chinese Federation, the EU, along with their allies, blockade ports from Britannia and tried to get Britannia to negotiation. However, there is no other information on what happened after. Leading up to the final parts of the timeline. On August 10th, 2010, Britannia launches their invasion. Japan, with their military, were destroyed, and soon the country fell into Britannia's hands, and Japan became Area 11. This would change the people of Japan's future forever. The remaining timeline continues after Japan was invaded. Lelouch, along with his sister and friend, had fled from the chaos. They soon come to Ashford Academy, where the Ashfords, who had good relationships with their mother, allowed them to stay in the residence within the campus. And so, this is where we end it. We have followed all the way up until 2017, where the main plot begins. However, there is another alternate take to the story, which was the Code Geass movies. Technically, you could say they were recaps. However, there was altercations with them. For one, specific characters lived, and others did other specific things that they didn't do in the original show itself. This definitely is an alternate take with the main plot, as it leads to the final movie after the recapped films that changed things, led to Lelouch of the Resurrection. While fans would like to see a continuation of Code Geass, some people may be disappointed, as it did lead to a different direction from the main source material. Whether you like it or not, it's got a different take on the plot. However, the historical timeline, prior to everything happening, still would remain the same as it is. It's just the plot of Code Geass, catching up to the main plot point, is altered. On top of that, a specific country is also mentioned, which was never mentioned in the original series. Either one you rather watch is up to the viewer itself, but by day's end, this documentary, bringing forth the whole historical aspect of the universe, still remains the same. I don't believe this will affect the main historical aspect. However, you must be prepared for different altercations with the plot, from both the original series and the movie universe. On top of that, there is also a new show that, which I guess, is going to be set in the movie timeline, not the original show. 2017 is where the main event of the story begins, either the show or the films. Akito the Exiled also takes place in 2017. In the Code Geass world, there are real historical stuff, but there are a lot of supernatural things, immortals, and beings from another place. However, One place in the Code Geass series is a place that can reach God, Sword of Akasha, and Charles Z. Britannia wants to destroy God, make the world a place where there will be no more chaos of humanity, doing what he has always done. Him along with his new wife. VV, his brother, and CC formed a contract with each other to activate the Ragnarok connection via the Sword of Akasha to destroy the gods. But one question lurks. Did Jesus exist in this world? If the Crusades happened to open the gateway for Marco Polo to travel to Asia, then Christianity would have existed. But there are a lot of mysteries about the Code Geass universe that I would like to know. Religion, God, Jesus. Even though it's an alternate timeline of our own, it still holds some real historical events in our world. The power of the Geasses that exist in the Code Geass is interesting, as they have their own powers, control others, stop Geasses, freeze a person, and reverse time. But the fact is, the Geasses was around since the dawn of time began in the Code Geass world, as it's been passed down through centuries. There is another being in Akito the Exiled, caretaker of space-time. She has watched humanity and balances the world within. She is a consciousness of the universe, a being that no one else can see, only those who can see her can. Yet, in Akito the Exiled, she can watch over certain events and jump into them, changing the game, or in this case, guiding the character, Layla Macau, or talking to General Smiles. The Code Geass universe is an interesting one, but it wouldn't be a world you want to live in. The show itself was a success in Japan. It soon came to the West. It spanned books and the OVA of the same name. It also shows two friends, one tries to change the government from the inside, while the other rebel, and makes you think, which one is the best option? From its story to its alternate history. It's really interesting. A different scenario of what if. So, even though some people think it's overrated or don't like it, others say it's a classic anime. And I say it's an interesting one with history and fiction.
うさ誰もが一人じゃないその名前を呼び合えばきっと七色に輝くだろう心つなぐ架け橋が